I have three things to say. First, thanks a lot for coming. And by way of conclusion, we took risks. We wanted to take risks. They're not huge risks. The first was to mix countries and cultures and European institutions, all of that in a mix. And at the end of the day, what we sensed was that there was a lot of goodwill and a community of values that goes a long way, and some legal, political, administrative hassle that we need to overcome. We mixed two cultures that I find extremely interesting. The culture of quality assurance in training that has developed such efforts in harmonization that it's historically incredible. In a world of diversity and complexity, actually having that common framework is an extremely solid base. And the world of evaluation and research, and the world of higher education and research, which is also very diverse. But there's also a community of values. These two cultures are different, and that's a good thing. But of course, it's in their interest to communicate because there are shared objects and concerns. The future will tell if the work we've tried to initiate today is to bear fruit. But since these challenges are much bigger than us, we have our work cut out for ourselves, and I'm pretty optimistic. And the last thing I wanted to say was to introduce Jean-Pierre Bourguignon. I'd like to thank him infinitely, even though I'll have to take French leave before he's done. He's a mathematician, a professor at the CNRS, a professor at Polytechnics, and he's one of the reasons why I regret having left Polytechnics, and is an honorary professor at the Institute of Higher Scientific Studies. He's someone who in France has been promoting scientific excellence for years, and maybe that's become a bit hackneyed, but let's talk about scientific excellence. And we're a bit parochial here in France, you know, and sometimes a bit too focused on our national problems. And he's promoted Europe. And over the last few years, you've educated us. Thank you, Jean-Pierre.
Bonjour, bon après-midi à tout le monde.
Hello, everybody. I've decided to speak English. So I don't want to be a typical representative of France. You see, in this very European context, I'll speak English now.
Particularly Thierry, for inviting me to present some conclusive remarks at the end of an intensive day of exchanges between stakeholders at European level, discussing how a European area of higher education and research can move forward. Several of the roundtables did address issues connected with evaluation in the context of higher education and research. If you allow me to rephrase a bit the titles of these sessions, the second session dealt with what is at stake with evaluation. The third one, in two parts, with new themes and new challenges on the agenda of the evaluation of research in Europe. I therefore feel a duty to offer you my approach on the theme of evaluation, incorporating some of the points of view we heard from distinguished experts and practitioners. This is why I was taking notes and changing my speech while you were speaking. For those of you who don't know me, it may prove useful that I give you some background on my itinerary, not just to show off, but just so that you, in this way, you can have an idea of some of the possible biases my approach may present. I'm a mathematician, as Thierry said. We are both mathematicians. That is a scientist at one end of the spectrum. I've been involved in the mathematical community at national, European, international levels. I'm presently a member of the Committee on Open Science in the International Mathematical Union. The mathematical community is known to have a special modus operandi, but this is the case of many, if not all, scientific communities. Differences in the practice of research are something we must always keep in mind, as forgetting them leads to major misunderstandings and to very bad mistakes. One must accept that the one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work when one discusses assessment of research. This is a disturbing news for people who are obsessed with normalizing evaluation processes, and unfortunately, some bureaucrats are obsessed. For several years, I was the editor-in-chief of a German mathematical journal with more than a century of history. And I evaluated institution research program in some 15 countries in 4 continents, some dealing with an overview of the local higher education institutions, but most of them were focused on mathematics, but certainly not all. I was confronted with the ethical dimension of assessment in the context of the CNRS Ethics Committee. I was a member of for 12 years and I chaired it for 4 years. I was confronted with a truly pluridisciplinary approach, and actually, if I look back at my career, this was one of the most rewarding experiences I took part in due to the willingness of people involved to discuss issues openly. Of course, it is during my time as president of the European Research Council that thinking about and dealing with evaluation was a very substantial part of my activity. Indeed, the ERC Scientific Council has the full responsibility of defining the evaluation process across disciplines and of monitoring it. Thanks to the wonderful dedication and professionalism of the ERC executive agency staff, this setting gave me an opportunity to learn a lot about the process and how it can be driven. Being embedded in the European Commission, it also gave me the possibility to learn how evaluation is performed in other parts of the EU framework program and in other European countries. So much on my itinerary. Fundamentally, I always felt I was acting as a scientist, making the case for his fellow scientists. In this speech, double thesis I want to defend and to illustrate is the following. Evaluation lies at the heart of the higher education and research ecosystem, and it should itself be considered as an ecosystem. This implies it is inappropriate and therefore dangerous to isolate from one another the different forms evaluation takes. For me, it is of paramount importance to consider how its different components interact, and they do interact strongly. At all times, the diversity of the world of higher education and research has to be kept in mind, and this was reminded to us by many speakers today, as it is one of its key characteristics and value. I propose to discuss this double thesis under 3 angles. First, the continuum of evaluation. Second, how its different components interact. And third, how to handle diversity and various other dimensions that impact evaluation. Let us start with the continuum of evaluation in research work. Research work requires assessing frequently documents produced by other researchers. Confronted with other people's articles, any researcher needs to assess their value intrinsically, but also in relation with the possible use he or she should make of them. This is an important step in the research process. It needs to be taught to students early and thoroughly. That's part of the mentoring that we heard from Deborah. In such a situation, you are your own judge and you have to learn how to perform this job efficiently. That is to rely on it enough, but not too much to avoid killing your own possibly original view. Note though that already in practicing this exercise, going further away from your own domain of expertise can be painful. Still, being forced to leave your comfort zone is a situation to be presented positively to students to avoid, they consider it as an experience to avoid. Another related modality of evaluation concerns articles publication. Students must be trained on how to write articles highlighting their contribution while acknowledging accurately what others have done. Further than that, students should also be exposed to how one should write a referee report on an article. Indeed, if the main purpose of the refereeing process is to decide whether an article should be published, it is as important, for me actually more important, to learn how to provide a critical view constructively. The contribution of referees is also to improve articles. Actually, one of the main differences between the good and the bad journals lies exactly there. Another setting one needs to consider when discussing assessment in the higher education and research environment concerns panels set up by funding agencies to decide on grants. There, one needs to make a difference between bottom-up programs and top-down ones. For the first ones, the DRC is one of them, the only selection criteria are scientific quality and originality. In some sense, the evaluation taking place there is in full continuity with the two activities presented before. But panel members are required to be able to work as a group. This means to listen to the opinions of others, sometimes to challenge them, and some other times to complement them. In the end, a consensus decision has to emerge. Top-down programs are usually in place to address some well-defined priorities, and it is therefore normal that evaluation takes those into account. Hence, quality must be appreciated with a twist. Most of the time, the format of the proposal submitted introduces more dimensions to the assessment. As an example, for cooperative projects, the outline provided in the proposal of the cooperative work has to be credible. Clearly, some organizational competence and experience in this matter is required from people assessing such projects. The evaluation of institutions follows most of the time a different route, as it often involves a site visit, sometimes an extensive one, and interviews with a number of institutional actors. The amount of information made available to evaluators is generally more considerable. Then, on the basis of data describing past and present achievements, the job of the panel consists in assessing whether the institutional evolution foreseen has the right level of ambition or whether other goals should be set. Clearly, considerations that need to be mobilized in such an evaluation process belong to a variety of domains, from pure science to management of human resources, from economic impact to international collaboration. So much so for the continuum of evaluation of research in different settings. Already you see why I insist on not separating assessment processes from the life of the scientific communities. Scientists need to be prepared to participate in these different forms of evaluation, but this activity must remain connected in a natural way with their research work. I will not leave this first part without touching the assessment of teaching. In some sense, ideas similar to the ones I just developed apply to it, in spite of the need to involve younger students. Making it a worthwhile exercise for them is not obvious, partly because they come from different backgrounds, hence are in different positions to absorb a given teaching. Therefore, most likely, an average view is not going to be helpful. Still, I would defend the position that elaborating a response to a course attended can be made a rewarding exercise for students. Indeed, in order to present their perceptions and views, they, or at least some of them, will have to elaborate and document their spontaneous reactions. We are aware that students may have different expectations and varying desire to invest time and energy in a given course. Hence, there may be several optimal forms to teach a specific topic. But for the teacher to be aware of the students' reactions in their diversity is a precious piece of information in order to improve the design of a course. This doesn't mean he or she would have to change fundamentally the strategy chosen after being alerted about a mismatch with some students, as opinions of groups of students may evolve from one year to the next. It is now time to move to the second part of my speech, discussing how the different components of evaluation interact. As said earlier, this is too often underestimated. It is therefore important to understand how the process works. I will start discussing briefly institutions assessment and then focus on grant evaluation, because there one can most easily identify the actors: applicants, evaluators, and people in charge of running the program. First, let us consider the process involved in the assessment of institutions. To inform the panel charged with the evaluation often requires a substantial amount of work from the staff of the institution requested to produce a self-evaluation document. This effort is an essential part of the exercise. Another essential part is the interaction with the panel during the site visit. Questions raised, comments made, even if they do not make it to the final report, contribute a lot to the assessment. This stresses the value of taking into consideration all components of the exercise and not just the formal part of it, namely the final report. Let us move to grant evaluation. When applying to a given program, scientists hope to be successful, and for that purpose, try to identify what can improve their chances. One important element is to know the criteria used in the evaluation and how they are amalgamated to reach a decision. The format of the application is defined by the structure running the program, whose aim is, of course, to fulfill its objectives in the best possible way. To achieve that, it is key to convince scientists with the best possible match to apply. Evaluators are also aware of the objectives of the program and do their best to contribute to them through the choice of applications they select. Many programs of the European Commission use evaluators who apply themselves to do the job for which they feel competent. In the case of the ERC, things follow a different route. Identifying potential panel members is one of the key responsibilities of Scientific Council. But in both cases, getting scientists to accept to participate in an evaluation is not so simple. Taking part in a panel is hard work and not so well paid, as you all know, and many people are often overworked. On top of that, several balances in the composition of panels have to be kept in terms of disciplines covered, of gender, and of geographical diversity. A consequence of this situation is that there is also a notion of success rate relative to acceptance by scientists approach to, in the end, serve on a panel. It is, for example, much more difficult to convince women scientists to participate than men because there are less of them in most disciplines and they tend to be even more overworked. Let me now turn to the issue of the coherence between applicants, evaluators, and the staff supporting a program. Achieving it at a high degree is certainly one of the main reasons for the success of the ERC. Its original governance is embodied in its scientific council composed of 22 scientists with different backgrounds, covering a large spectrum of disciplines. The council has in particular the responsibility of defining how applications should be evaluated. In line with the request by the scientific community to have a program focused on supporting ambitious scientific projects, the key part of an ERC application is its scientific part, the management side being kept to a minimum. Therefore, applicants know that to have a chance to be successful when submitting a project to the ERC, they have to work hard at developing convincingly their most ambitious ideas in their proposal. At the same time, what motivates evaluators to respond positively to a request by the Scientific Council to participate in the ERC evaluation is precisely that they know that their job there will be to discuss the science and only the science. They also know that the other members of the panel are there to exchange about the science, a very rewarding exercise from a scientific point of view. Decisions are fully made by panel members with no intervention of Scientific Council nor of the agency staff. Of equal great importance is the quality of the support given to panel members by the staff. Actually, for many of them, the staff members, having the possibility of interacting with high-level scientists is the key motivation in accepting to join the agency. That the discussion in the panel is fully concentrated on the proposal scientific quality is a key argument to gain acceptance by high-level scientists. This is an example of a positive interaction between the three groups involved in the evaluation having all their priorities aligned. Clearly, in the context of the framework program, the EU framework program, this is a singular situation since there, most often, excellence is defined using more criteria than just scientific quality. The one-size-fits-all dogma should have exceptions. One must therefore try by all means to keep such a positive alignment. Can this be challenged? Introducing a so-called lump sums mechanism for ERC grants could be such a challenge, and this is why I consider it very risky. Why? If the idea of suppressing financial controls after the contract is signed may look attractive, one cannot forget it would mean moving the continuous control upfront with two major consequences. For applicants, the need at application stage to provide detailed evidence of the way the money will be used. For evaluators, losing the exclusive focus on scientific quality, they do have to guarantee the financial commitment is detailed and solid enough to grant the application without further financial control. Let us come back to what it would imply on the applicant's side. The change cannot probably be done without imposing that the project be structured along a list of deliverables, something that has been a taboo at the ERC from its first day, because it rigidifies project and limits the possibility of an open-ended quest. Host institutions would have to mobilize much more intensively their administrative staff at application stage. Clearly, this would be at the disadvantage of institutions that are not so well equipped with high-level administrators, when the ERC is trying hard to have more of them as host institutions. On the evaluators side, researchers who are passionate about science would be much more likely to turn down an invitation to serve on the panel because of the new duties. Indeed, the nature of the discussion in the panel would surely be strongly affected if scientific quality and reliability of financial accounts have to be considered at the same level. The job of the staff would also be heavily affected, since their present focus on checking that the science is presented with integrity would have to be broadened to involve financial matters. The risk of losing the high level of coherence presented earlier as key appears considerable, with a high risk of affecting the ERC quality. It is now time to move to the third part of my speech, discussing how evaluation can take into account diversity, integrity, and open science. It is certainly difficult to discuss these issues across the board, as they take several forms depending on situations. Let us begin by diversity. This, of course, means different things to different people. If one focuses on making progress in gender diversity, for example, this requires having a good knowledge of the situation in different fields. There are considerable variations from one discipline to the next. One must first ensure that the act of submitting a proposal is not creating a significant bias. This may come from a lower level of institutional support to women, or from the feeling that women are less successful than men. This shows again an instance where the evaluation participates in perpetuating a discrimination in more than one way. At the ERC, the progress in the percentage of women applying did follow the success rate of women slightly surpassing in average that of men. For that, some specific measures at application stage had been introduced. Presently, situation is more or less satisfactory, knowing that there are still some disciplines where the presence of women has not yet reached an adequate level. Diversity has other dimensions, in particular the geographic origin of scientists. Several countries have been witnessing a significant portion of the young generation of scientists leaving the country. What is at stake is to create the conditions for many of them to return, making their departure an example of positive brain circulation rather than brain drain. It is well known that quota could give to some the feeling to be a solution when they introduce a bias that prevents from facing the reality of the situation. Sustained cooperation efforts are a much more efficient way of dealing with the situation. Let me now turn to the issue of integrity. For that too, all components of the assessment process are concerned. The staff organizing it must put in place appropriate tools to detect any kind of misbehavior by applicants, plagiarism, falsified references. Conflicts of interest have to be spotted reliably, and institutions have to adopt strict measures when their attention is called to one of the faculty members having broken an integrity rule. On certain matters, one lesson one quickly learns is that what really is important is the perception of the possibility of a conflict of interest from outside. This means that rules to be put in place have to be extremely strict and consider all possible angles from which an interest can interfere with the decision to be taken. On this matter, considerable progress has been made, but the sustained vigilance is in order, as only one failure makes the selection process lose its credibility. The last issue I would like to address in this part concerns open science. On such a matter too, one has to consider the extreme diversity of situations regarding ways research results can be made broadly available. In the first place, the notion of a publication and the nature of data collected vary. It is therefore only at the level of scientific communities that the issue can be properly handled. Once again, uniform rules ignoring real situations cannot be the solution, which requires the bodies representing scientific communities to organize themselves better. One has to create a credible perspective for open science to become a widespread policy. Bottom-up initiatives such as DORA or the Appel de Paris are welcome steps forward. In conclusion, my hope is to have convinced you that indeed, quoting, evaluation lies at the heart of the higher education and research ecosystem and should itself be considered as an ecosystem. To view evaluation as something that can live its own life and be put in place without giving due consideration to scientific communities, which are both subjects of the evaluation and its actors, is just wrong. This is also why evaluation should be included at an early stage in students' training and continuously monitored. Thank you for your attention.